Hey everyone, I'm Mike Settele, the founder of Settele Tutoring, and in this lesson I'm going to talk about what it takes to get a 700 on the SAT reading section. We'll go over things to memorize, ways to strategize, and I will give you rough estimates of the number of questions you're allowed to get wrong in order to be getting that kind of score consistently. So before we get into this though, if you are not already consistently in the 600s, don't bother watching this video. Go back. I have a video about what it takes to get the 600s. You need to be able to accomplish all the things I talk about in that video first. You can't just jump ahead because this is going to get into some advanced stuff. And if you don't know the basics, you aren't going to be able to understand that advanced stuff first. So it's an incremental process. So make sure that you are consistently in the 600s, accomplishing all the goals that I talked about in that other video before you worry about this one. Now, if you do get a 700 though, that is an excellent score. You're going to be sending that to pretty much every single college. It'll be great to have that kind of score. It'll really boost your application. So this is a very impressive thing to achieve. Let's look at some things that you need to memorize. Again, assuming you've memorized all the other grammar rules I talked about on the way to a 600, now you can start to add in the advanced ones. There are 3 verb tense rules. You want to make sure that you understand what those do and how to tell them apart. I have an excellent lesson on the verb tense rules. Also things like modifiers and connector placement. These are harder rules that don't come up very often, but if you can understand them, you will be able to get them right consistently. In terms of reading comprehension, it is time to move away from just understanding the basic outlines of passages and starting to understand the little details that they put in there. So this means that we need to know, or at least be comfortable with, literary vocabulary. This is my kind of term for this. Words like innocuous, duplicitous, verbose, rudimentary, exasperate. These are definitely harder words that you wouldn't encounter on a day-to-day basis, but they do matter for a lot of the passage questions. So if you don't know what they mean, go look them up. And now is the time to start memorizing words. I have words on my website that you can start to memorize, find word lists in other places. And yes, every time in your SAT prep and just school life, you encounter a word you've never seen before or that you don't have a concrete definition of, look it up right away. Make a flashcard, try to learn it. This stuff matters. Now, maybe an easier vocabulary goal is to just try to memorize the definitions of all of the remaining transition words. For the 600s, you should have learned the top 20. Now we can get into some of the more obscure ones like hence, that said, indeed, subsequently. I talk about this all in my lesson on the transition, so check out my channel homepage, the links in my description here to start to master those things. Let's also talk about ways to strategize, and getting on to 700 is much more about strategy than memorization. You've kind of got everything down memorization-wise. Now we need to make sure we are implementing those facts in a really, really good way. For grammar, it is important that we are able to predict the rules. So what this means is that every time I see a grammar question, I'm looking at the answer choices first, and based on the answer choices, I can tell immediately what rule is being tested so that I don't fall for a trap. This is fundamental to doing well in the grammar, so you need to be able to be comfortable with the rules individually, but to be able also to identify them when you encounter them on the grammar sections. You also need to be very good at playing the transition game. And again, I talk about this in my lesson on the transitions. Basically, yes, we need to know all the transition words, but we also need to know the kind of the weird rules that the SAT plays with as they build those kinds of questions, ways to avoid traps, ways to make the questions easier. So make sure you understand how to play that game, because a lot of those transition questions I would not be able to get right if not for these kinds of strategies. And then this may seem obvious, but basically our strategy is to maximize the number of correct answers. And that is especially important when we get into the hard module where we're going to have a big time constraint. You might not have time to answer every single question. But remember, your goal is to get as many questions right as possible. So that might mean that you sacrifice a few hard questions for the sake of spending more time on the stuff that you have the best chance of getting right. You have to be able to let go of hard questions if it means that it saves points in other places. So let's talk about what this means in terms of the raw numbers. So as always, this is just an estimate. The tests are different. The points are not the same for each question, so it's going to vary slightly, but this is a good estimate. What we want to make sure we do, obviously, is that we get into the hard module, but more than that, in the first module, you really want to limit your errors to just one hard passage, one vocabulary question where you don't know the words. Everything else should be gettable. And the reason is that you're not going to have as much of time pressure in the first module. So you will have time to sort through those answer choices and really read those passages again and make sure that you are right. Now, don't go so fast that you make mistakes on things like grammar and transitions and outlines, where we also have that kind of predictable way of getting questions right because there's a lot of memorization. But yes, in order to get that 700, you really got to be close to perfect in the first module. module. But then in the second module, yes, we're going to have harder questions. It's going to be much harder to finish, but we have a lot more room for error. I estimate that you can get about 7 wrong and still get in the 700. So it might be a little off, but basically that's doable. And that means that you can get like half of those hard passage questions wrong and still do well. Now, some of you are thinking, okay, great, I'll just get down to 2 answers and I'll pick one each time. That's not even what I mean here. I mean that you can run out of time and guess randomly on like 3 or 4 passages if it means you're getting every single other thing right. So you want to spend the limited amount of time you have in the hard module on questions you're going to have the best chance of. So for many people, that's going to mean sacrificing passage questions, but you got to make sure you lock up points where we know we can get them. So we really don't want to get more than just one GTO question wrong. GTO stands for grammar, transitions, and outlines. These are the questions at the end of the module. Remember, for our pacing strategy, we should be doing those questions first, and you really cannot afford any careless errors on these. Maybe one transition question might be hard, but you really got to make sure you're getting all those right. If you are, that gives you tons of flexibility on the vocabulary questions where you might encounter words you just don't know, or on the passage questions where you just might run out of time and not be able to answer every question. But it's okay. 7 wrong is very generous. There's only 27 questions in the module. So if you're locking in the points where you know the rules, when you know the transition words, you can have a lot of flexibility to get things wrong on the other parts of the reading section and still get an amazing 700. So obviously, fewer wrong means higher scores, but that's a really reassuring thing, I think, for most people, is that you don't need to be perfect to get in the 700s. If you have questions about this, please put them in the comments. I'm always making new lessons as well, so make sure you like this video and subscribe to my channel so that you never miss a new lesson, new piece of material. Remember, once again, I'm Mike Settele, the founder of Settele Tutoring. And remember, when it comes to your scores, don't settle for less, Settele for more. Thanks for watching.